Welcome to the lore of Swordsfall, a semi-weekly, maybe monthly, whenever I kind of get around to it, part podcast, part YouTube, where basically I'm going to go through and read to you the lore from the creator himself, because I know that there's a lot of lore, you want to hear it, you don't always have time to read it, so I'm going to read it to you. Welcome to Swordsfall. For today's issue or episode or recording or whatever you want to call it, we're going to do the general overview of what is Swordsfall. And basically what I'm going to do is read to you the Welcome to Swordsfall article that is on my World Anvil. If you want to go along, you can just go to worldanvil.com/swordsfall, or you can check it out afterwards or just listen. So, alright, let's hop into it. Welcome to Swordsfall, an overview of a world in flux. Welcome to the world of Tykor and the story of Swordsfall. The land within is one of wonder and at the same time, profound horror. On Tykor, you don't have to wonder if the gods are real, or if the legends are true. The proof is often within walking distance. For in this world, the gods live amongst the mortals they created. Though just as much as symbols of the people are alive, so are their nightmares. Just below the surface, a source of corruption, grander than anyone can fathom, lurks ever so silently, awaiting its grand moment. The bond between humans and their divine is more interwoven than mortals know and the gods light onto. So, let's start with the planet Tykor. The world is split almost entirely into two different halves, only connected by one piece of land called the Isle. With the world basically cut into two, the various cultures and land developed pretty differently. Tykor consists of the northern hemisphere, the southern hemisphere, and the Grand Divide. On the Grand Divide sits a few independent nations that operate pretty much outside of the normal global cycle of things. On the planet itself, Tykor, the legends depict an epic battle between the gentle creator of all, Ishvana, and the malignant symbol of corruption, Xavian. The tale of wonder and surface includes the birth of the second sun, the creation of dragons, and the shattering of planes. The Grand Divide. The ocean doesn't just sit idly by on Tykor. The water is alive and teeming with action. The Grand Divide is a sapphire arena full of hurricanes, lightning storms, typhoons, cryptic portals, buccaneers, kraken, and more. To ride the seas isn't just a hobby, it's a way of life that can end at the bottom of blue. So the biggest thing I need everyone to kind of realize is that Tykor is split into two different halves. You have a northern hemisphere and a southern hemisphere. And in between that, you have what's called the Grand Divide, which I just read a little bit about and that's basically the ocean. So just like in modern times in real life, we have a large ocean. In this one, it's also a large ocean, except these two continents are almost separate, except for just this piece called the Isle, right? So, in the northern hemisphere of Tykor, you have mostly a forest climate, and with the center part being the most dense. The northernmost parts of the hemisphere are covered in snow-capped mountains, and they come down to southern beaches. You have smelly swamps in the east all the way to enormous sky-piercing mountains in the west. So, what parts make up that northwestern hemisphere of Tykor? So you have four main parts: Garuda, Grimnest, Haklor, and the Canopy. Right. So Garuda is your most major one. It's the forest area of the north. It's called Garuda, and it's named after the fiery phoenix deity that settled into the area, which is literally the great phoenix Garuda. It's ruled by what's called the Divine Order of the Phoenix, a devout order that was handpicked by their gods called the Divinity. So the Divinity are basically just about any god or deity that exists in Garuda. Then you have Grimnest. It's an isolated, godless region isolated between the Canopy, which is the most western section, and these giant mountains called Inkai, right? So, to the west of Garuda, almost hidden behind the Inkai Mountains, sits a land devoid of gods. Grimnest is an area, not a nation, as all the people are free to do as they wish. The Grim are the people that call it home, as well as Omicron technologies and several pirate factions. So Grimnest has no deities, no gods. They have pirates and tech, and basically people that have figured out a way for themselves. Then you have Haklor. Located in the eastern corner of the northern peninsula, Haklor is the oldest country on Tykor, thanks in no small part to its god king, Haken. Right? So, while small in size, it's an economic beast that's led by Haken. He formed the nation of Haklor to oversee his territory. So Haklor is a bit unique in the fact that it is ruled by what is essentially a king and a god. He was a god before he was a king, but as far as the nation is concerned, he's the only one of either one they've ever known. It's not so much he rules it with an iron fist, he rules it completely as he wants to. It's his playline, it's his world, it's what he does. Alright, that's the northern hemisphere. You do have the canopy. I'm not going to talk too much about that other than the fact that it is a place that you do not want to go to and most people do not go to. It is one of two areas that are completely uninhabited by humans, partially due to the fact that anybody who goes to the canopy doesn't come back alive. So, how about the southern hemisphere of Tychor? Well, the southern hemisphere of Tychor is almost solely an arid desert region. The outer edges are extremely hot and almost completely inhospitable, with the most western part of the hemisphere being completely devoid of life, another danger zone. That's called the Ebon Cascade, right? So in the southern hemisphere, you have the Ebon Cascade, which is the part we don't go to, just like the canopy. Then you have Vinyana and Rhamnos. Vinyana is basically one of the other major powers along with Garuda. The vast portion of the livable desert area in the south is known as Vinyana. The Republic in Vinyana controls the area, a republic created by the defector dragon Ryujin. You will hear some of these dragons come up occasionally, especially Ryujin. They're called the Wretched Ones. They are basically old elementals that were taken by an evil god at the beginning of time and warped into these ancient dragons. Well, one of them defected and basically helped defeat the rest of them, and he ended up going off to make his own people settled into his own place, and that is what Vinyana is. Then you have Rhamnos. In the most southern part of southern Tychor sits a desert kingdom in turmoil. Rhamnos has a new king, one which executed the former king, his own younger cousin. Rhamnos is one that I know a lot of people have not heard of yet, because I haven't talked about it a lot. It's probably the one most close to what people think of as Egypt, though I use a little bit more real world reference for that. But in Rhamnos, the issue is that they had a king, and he was not a good king. He was young, he was corrupted, and he was basically being used as a puppet by a council. While his older uncle, who was in the military, basically decided that he could not stand by and watch his nephew continue to run their empire into the ground. And he assassinated them and took over. So the land is dealing with the fact that they have a new king and all the things that deal with that. So those are your major players on the major continents. The two biggest ones you really need to remember is that in the northern hemisphere you have Garuda, and the southern hemisphere you have Vinyana. Those are your two big major players. However, that's not everything. So you do have some independent nations, right? And so these independent nations are the ones who do not exist within either the northern or southern parts. One of them is the Isle, which I mentioned earlier. They're an independent nation, and one that tries to be independent in the face of being the road that literally combines the world. So the Isle is a strip of land that is the only thing that in like a terrestrial way connects the northern and the southern halves. So without that, they're basically cut off other than water. So everybody who lives in this area in a way is there because they don't want to be a part of this northern southern struggle, and they're okay with that. It is something that they often have a hard time keeping and maintaining because people don't always like to respect that. And last but not least, you have the independent freeland of Teslin. It's an island sanctuary for crystal priests to learn and hone their dangerous yet delicate art. So one of the primary technologies in Swordsfall is called Azorean. Unfortunately, it is pretty much poisonous to all humans that touch it, except for some people who have basically a genetic quirk that lets them handle this. These are basically what are crystal priests, but they have to be trained in how to properly use their power. And because it's something that's so universal and kind of goes beyond country lines, basically a group of them have established their own independent land, and that's where they train before they go back and basically work among people. And that right there are your major players. The rest is professions, which we'll get into in another episode because I don't want to just go through some of them. I'm going to go through all of them, and there is quite a bit. So, what do you need to take away from what is Swordsfall? The biggest thing you need to remember is that the whole world in itself is mapped out. It's not the kind of place where there is dark territories that no one knows of. They very much know where the area is. Now, with that said, that doesn't mean that it's fully explored. In the southern hemisphere, you have the Ebon Cascade, which is basically arid, destructive, corrupted land that people literally cannot survive in, along with the canopy. So those two are pretty huge swaths of land which people know where they are. They know where their borders are, but they can't map the inside. It's just too dangerous. Now, with that said, it's still a very large world. So it's not so much that because there's no unknown territory means that there's no room for adventure. Quite the opposite. One of the things I like people to remember is that in our modern world, things just seem smaller than they really are. You know, if you don't have a map and you don't have GPS and you end up in your woods somewhere, you can truly get lost. It happens all the time. So that's something I want to make Tychor seem, but in a larger sense. It's not so much that there's no technology, there is technology, but the world, the environment itself is not the sort of thing that can be easily controlled. It can't be easily conquered. So humans always find themselves working to find their place in nature. And with that, that's pretty much everything. So I guess we'll do a quick wrap up. Tychor is basically made up of two giant spheres, the northern and the southern sphere. Each one has a couple different countries in it. In the northern, you have Garuda, Hawklore, Grimnest, and the Canopy. In the southern region, you have Vinyata, Ramnos, and the Ebon Cascade. And then you have two independent nations, and that's the Isle and Teslan. If you like the content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and if you would please give a comment. And for more information about Swordsfall, head to the website www.swordsfall.com.